I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you today for a few minutes about heaven and hell. Most of us have concepts and ideas that we've learned from Sunday school or from our religious background about both of those places, and most of us have been taught and have come to believe that both heaven and hell are places. That may be the case, but in our philosophy, we look at heaven and hell as levels of consciousness and places in which we can be in our minds, because we believe that we live in our minds and not in the world, and that the physical world is made up of the content and the dynamic action of our minds. If you hold a belief in heaven and hell as a place, that's perfectly all right. I'm simply going to share with you some of the philosophies and ideas that we have about the heavenly experiences and the hellish experiences. And even if you believe, and if you choose to continue to believe, that these are places, you can relate to the fact that you have had experiences in your physical life that you could call heavenly, or times when you felt that you were in heaven, and other times when you felt that you were truly in hell. These hellish experiences seem to rob us so often of the vitality that we need and want in life. None of us want to live in despair and depression. None of us want to be oppressed and feel this horrible feeling that comes at those times when we do have great difficulties in our lives. In the next few minutes, I'd like to talk to you about some dynamic ways in which we believe, as New Thought Christians, as true students, we can deal with these experiences of the idea of being in hell here in this physical life. Every one of us is going to have a time in our lives, some more than others, when we feel that we are just so oppressed, when life is not worth living, when we have so many problems, and that we're weighted down and can't deal with the circumstances and situations. If you find yourself in that situation, or if you know someone who is, I invite you to take the concepts that we're going to share with you and apply them. And if you do that, your mind action, the way that you're thinking about your circumstance and situation in life, will change. And as your mind action changes, as the way that your mind functions changes, your life will change, the quality of your life will change, and the circumstances and situations, though they may not change immediately, will begin to be transformed into something different. You'll be able to move on. The first thing that I think is important if you're in the midst of a crisis, deeply depressed or in despair, is that you accept the fact and that you recognize the fact that you are in crisis. So often, whether we're religious people or not religious people, we seem to have difficulty in being willing to acknowledge where we are in our pain and suffering and be willing to ask for help. Sometimes we ask for help in the wrong places. There are many people to turn to if you are deeply depressed, if you are in the midst of despair for whatever reason, whether it's because of your health, because of a financial situation, whatever it is that's brought you into a depressed state. It is very helpful to acknowledge that fact and to reach out for help. You can reach out to a clergyman, you can reach out to a friend, you can reach out to those who are professionally trained psychiatrists and counselors, but it's important that you reach out and get the help that you need, depending upon where you are in the process. But recognize that you're in that crisis. It's all right to recognize that you're in crisis. It's even all right to say that you feel badly, that you are depressed. In the New Thought movement, many people are afraid of naming or saying what is wrong, because there is a thought and there is a teaching that as we say things, we empower them. And that's certainly true. And so it isn't necessary to dwell upon the fact that you're in a crisis, that you're in pain, that you hurt, that you're depressed, but it is important that you accept it and that you say it in your heart and in your mind, not to create a creative force, but to acknowledge that point and to move on and to get the help that you need to change the way that you're thinking. And that begins by recognizing where you are. You are where you are. If you hurt, you hurt. If you're sick, you're sick. If you are depressed, you are depressed. Now you can do something about it. When you deny it, or when you pretend, or when you medicate yourself, or when you run away, or when you try to evade the problem, that creates no resolution. So recognize it, accept it, ask for help, embrace help, and move through the process. The second thing that I think is important for us to do is to acknowledge that when we're in the midst of depression or despair, when we hurt inwardly, when our inner person hurts and we've been crushed, It's important for us to think about the physical body. We need to really be aware of the fact that the body houses our spiritual being, the body houses the mind, and that the body houses the mental process in which you find yourself. And so if you are depressed, if you are deeply burdened, that deep burden and that depression is in your physical mind, and it is a manifestation there, and that physical mind is reacting to a physical body. All of us know of the illnesses that are caused by the dynamic of mind. Ulcers are caused by nervousness and by the dynamic of mind. Heart conditions, high blood pressure, all of those things come about because of what's going on in our minds. And so we need to be aware of the mind and the body and the spirit connection. It is very important, it's very dynamic, and it is especially important if you're in the midst of crisis or a difficult situation in life. In life crisis, the physical body has to be nurtured and fed. All of us can deal with this reality. When the physical body is sick, the mental awareness is affected by the physical body. If you've had the flu, your mental status is not as good as it is when you are physically well. And so that cycle begins, the process. So if your mind is oppressed and depressed, if you're dealing with a crisis or a difficulty, then your body responds. You may lose appetite, you may not sleep as much, you may raise your blood pressure, you may increase your gastric acids. All of these things happen. And so as the mental state deteriorates, so the body deteriorates. As the body deteriorates, the mental status deteriorates. And down into a spiral that moves down, much like the depression that some of us feel, is accomplished both in the physical body and in the mental being. So taking care of our physical body, get rest, eat, relax, do what it is that you can do to care for the physical person as well as you deal with the mental and the spiritual aspects of your life. Something to consider when you are in the process of a crisis, especially depression and mental problems, is, this may sound odd, but it's very important, and it's something worth adding to your cadre of how you deal with times of crisis, is to consider the issue of life after death. You may think that when we're in the midst of depression, that's not the time to think about life after death. Whatever it is you think about life after death, whether it's a traditional view of going to a heavenly place, whether it is a more liberal view perhaps of spiritual progression or reincarnation, whatever it is, reflect upon the reality that in the life after death process, there is not a change of the circumstance and situation. One of the things that happens so often when difficulties weigh heavily upon us is that we become so deeply depressed. And as we are more deeply depressed, that depression turns inward and we become more and more withdrawn. And then a point in time in some people's lives comes when they believe that life isn't worth living, when they feel that they just want to die. Probably the most common time that this happens is when someone dies that we love in life, when someone is separated from us in this life experience, the end of a relationship. And we come to a point of crisis and we believe that we just don't want to live anymore. Well, it's important to remember, whatever your religious belief, that there is life after this life, and that because of that, going into that life doesn't solve the problem. If you're a traditional Christian, you believe there are consequences to what happens in this life on the other side. If you are a person from a metaphysical background or a New Thought background, much like ours in the philosophy that we teach, we believe that there is a karmic law of cause and effect. And so it is important that the reality of the death experience and life after death is very important. It's not an escape. It's not a valid way to deal with the circumstance and situation of life. Another ingredient is to practice and to learn the art of meditation. This is a key to dealing with deep depression, deep crisis, and deep despair in your life. And as you move through the process of dealing with these circumstances, meditation can be a magnificent tool to allow you to come up out of this hurtful situation, up out of your depression, up out of your despair. Meditation is probably the single most magnificent dynamic that can help you release the negative influences of mental bondage that come to almost all of us. As you practice meditation, and you can learn this from a variety of sources. If you know a church or a center that practices meditation, go there. There are books available, there are tapes available, there are people who are willing to help you. But meditation is distinctive and different from prayer. Prayer is a process of talking to God. Meditation is a process of calming yourself and allowing the infinite to flow into your heart and your life. If you've never meditated and you're in the midst of a life situation that has brought you despair or depression, begin to learn to meditate. If you are someone who has meditated and you're in a crisis, begin to meditate on a regular basis. If you're someone who has meditated for many, many years, when you find yourself in the midst of a difficult situation, draw upon that strength of deeper and deeper meditation. Maybe it will only be for a couple of minutes. Allow a couple of minutes to become 5 minutes, and allow 5 minutes to become 10 minutes. Allow 1 time a day to become 2 times a day, or 3 times a day, or 4 times a day. And that meditation process will open the awareness that you have to the divine presence of God and will bring you out of this circumstance and situation. And again, remember that we're talking about the hellish experiences of life, those times when you feel that you just can't deal with what's going on. Another important issue is to avoid negativity. So often we rely upon a circle of friends or family that we love very much, people that we've talked to and that we've come to know. But be very aware, especially if you're at a point of crisis and difficulty in your own life, of the people around you. If you have family members and you have friends who are negative, avoid them. Perhaps it's time to find new friends. Perhaps it's time to find a new circle of support, because at a point in time when you are negative, as you receive negative vibration and impulse, that negative vibration will simply build upon what you already have. And so what you need, and what we all need at these points in time, is a positive outlook and a positive vibration, and the avoidance of these negative issues of life. The dynamic of mind action is that our minds are creative and our minds function very much like sponges. They collect, our conscious mind collects what we experience in life. And we are called to be masters of our awareness, masters of our thought process. It is your mind that takes you to heaven or hell. Not worrying about the life after this one, but dealing with the circumstances and situations of your daily life. Whether your daily life here and now in this physical experience is a life of heaven or a life of hell is determined by the way that you think and the dynamic action of your mind. Your subconscious mind is calling up and feeding the conscious mind with the way that you have been conditioned to think. And you are called, you are invited, you are able to change the negative way that you think by impressing upon your subconscious mind the positive aspect of life. We do this through affirmation and denial. Affirmations are simple statements of spiritual truth. Affirmations are spoken repetitively again and again. They are contemplated, reflected upon, and thought about. And as the subconscious mind continues to hear these conscious positive affirmations, the subconscious mind is conditioned, as it accepts the positive affirmation, to send that positive affirmation, that positive impulse, back to the conscious mind at the point in time in which we need it. The use of meditation and affirmations and denials can strengthen you to choose whether you live in a consciousness of heaven or a consciousness of hell. It can empower you, these techniques can empower you to move from the awareness and the consciousness of a hellish experience into one of heaven. The challenge for us always is to be centered in the presence of God, to claim the infinite intelligence that is ours through our connectiveness with God, and to be able to deal with those times in our lives when we have difficulty, despair, sadness, and pain. There is great hope, and the philosophy that we teach empowers and strengthens all of humanity you and me and everyone who embraces these concepts with the reality that we can change our lives by changing the way that we think, that we can move ourselves from heaven to hell and back again in this conscious experience of life. And if we have a choice, and we do, wouldn't we all choose to be in a heavenly state of consciousness? Wouldn't we all choose to keep ourselves centered in these happy and joyful experiences of life and centered in that presence rather than the negative of hurt and pain and suffering? I invite you to employ some of these techniques. Begin to use meditation, begin to use affirmations and denials, begin to build your way of thinking into a new consciousness. And as you change your mind, as you change the way that you think, you can change the quality of your life. There is a universal principle, there are universal laws that are available to you and to everyone on this planet. And as we embrace those universal principles of mind dynamics and mind action, we change the quality of our lives. And as we do that, we become more empowered, stronger, and more victorious as perfect, whole, and perfect children of God. We believe in prayer. We believe it's a centering force. And we believe it is a very important opportunity for all of us to come into the awareness of the presence of God. So at this point in the program, we'd like to invite you to pause for a moment of prayer and reflection with us. Eternal God, we call upon your divine light and your illumination to come into all of the dark places of our lives, to be able to help us from the hellish experiences and to bring us into the radiance of the heavenly light of your divine presence. We call upon this divine mind of your consciousness and awareness to come into our midst and to center us in strength and power. We ask and know these things in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
That's a very marvelous reminder that heaven and hell are part of our life existence, and it's a normal part of our life existence.
Very important for us to understand that it's normal.
Right.
And so many people, especially spiritual people, will come to believe that they can avoid problems, or they can avoid depression, or they can avoid pain, or they can avoid the hellish experiences, when in reality, none of us can avoid those things. We have to experience them because life is a learning experience.
Yes, and some people go into denial about their problems just because they don't want to acknowledge that they are having that type of existence, which is just normal.
And in New Thought, I think we have a real problem in many circles because so many people just will not acknowledge. I mean, because they've gone to classes, they've studied, and they've decided that they just won't name it, they won't give it strength, they won't give it power, and they're just going to deny that it really exists. But as they deny that it exists, it doesn't deny the reality.
That's right, and they don't grow through whatever it is they're working through to create the balance. Because we go through all these experiences for the balance of life, because that's what it's all about. Heaven and hell, good and evil, light and dark. So as we deny, we're just putting it back on the back burner instead of facing it and going on. I know what I hear said so often about you, Dr. Costello, is that you truly live what you teach. And that's a wonderful thing. And I don't know if you can think of some of the secrets of your success in being always positive in your life. But I know you've gone through, like all of us, a lot of tragedies. Don't we all? That's what life is about. And yet you seem to always keep your equilibrium. And I imagine I know what you would tell people, but what would you tell people in crisis of how to come through this crisis triumphantly?
Well, I think the important thing is to understand the dynamic of mind action and to be centered in mind in the presence of God. And what that means is that it doesn't matter what happens. And so often things happen in our lives that are hurtful or that cause us pain, and they happen. And so we have to deal with them. I, like you and all of the people on this planet, have dealt with death and lost people that we've loved very much. That just happens. Yeah. Illness happens. Limit happens. And it's important to just be aware of the fact that in our mind, we always need to be centered in the presence of God. Despite what our human eyes see and what our human ears hear, the reality is that we are one with God and that God will empower and strengthen us to do what we need to do. And that keeps us in that heavenly consciousness.
Right.
And every time life pulls us into hell, we have a choice to step out of hell into the consciousness of heaven. And sometimes that's very difficult to do. But it begins with a process of changing the way that we think. It is dynamic mind action.
I remember at the death of my daughter, who died when she was 3 years old, I stood and knelt praying the Lord's Prayer, and it took me about a half hour to say the Lord's Prayer, because I was being undergirded as I said that, and it's the, to me, memorable experience of my life, of where I was undergirded because I was looking to a higher power for energy and strength and sustenance and just the ability to go on. And I learned then that if we look to this higher power, then we receive it. Whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, believing ye shall receive. And I was looking for how could I bear this pain, and I could. But it took a half hour of getting myself attuned to God the whole.
But see, you did just exactly what we were just talking about. You call it prayer, but in fact, as you were praying the Lord's Prayer in that circumstance, you were meditating.
Yes.
You were praying the prayer maybe with your tongue, but with your mind you were
Yes.
receptive, you were meditating.
Right.
And as you were meditating, the power and presence of God was speaking to you.
Attuning.
It was attuning you and empowering you. And then the key, which is exactly what you did, was you went back to life.
Yeah.
So often people go into meditation or they go into some reflection about the challenge or the problem, and they don't come out.
Right.
So
I remember that further about that. The doctor came and asked if I would like a sedative, and it was in the morning, and I said, well, I would just have to awaken. And so I was being, I think, guided from my inner teachers to not accept that sedative, because I would just have to awaken, and it would just be that much more painful when it happened. I liked what you said about meditation, because to me that's been my mainstay. And of course meditation is attuning yourself to the inner realities. And one thing that helps us with our meditation is the deep breathing. And I think if our public would just realize that they can do deep breathing exercises when they're in crisis, just of a minute nature, any crisis, then it helps adjust their bodies so that they can then go into a meditative state. So would be in a heavenly state. Because to me, the hell is when we're living such horrible things, regardless of what they are, and then the heaven is when we're happy and at one with God.
At one with God and
Right.
centered and peaceful. And just exactly what you're talking about is dealing with the physical aspect of your
Yes.
being,
Yes.
that physical aspect. And when we take a deep breath, when we begin the process, and of course meditation begins with breathing exercises, because then our bodies begin to release the stress of life and we begin to connect. But it also is relaxing to the body. And we have to really be aware, I think, of that mind-body-spirit connection and the importance of it, especially at points in time when we are depressed, when we're in despair, when we're in the hellish experiences of life. And the only way to get out is to be able to connect that mind-body-spirit with the divine presence of God.
Yes, yes. And I know I've worked in hospice and as a minister with people who are ill, and I teach them to just do the deep breathing. And as they do that, you can see the shift of their consciousness. And another beautiful thing is when people die, if they're attuning themselves, you can see the difference in their facial expression as they die. And I'm sure you've seen that. When people die very fearful, then they're somewhat contorted. It depends on how fearful they are. But if they're relaxed and just deep breathing and going over peacefully, then it shows on their countenance, and they have the beautiful glow that remains after their spirit has left the body.
And it is a further confirmation of the fact that there isn't great conflict at that moment of transition or death. And the conflict that happens so often with people is a mental conflict, a spiritual conflict, and a physical conflict. So if all three of those aspects of our life are at conflict, and there is no peace and there is no centering, my goodness, you're in hell.
Exactly.
You're there before you get to the other side. Don't worry about the other side.
Of course, we think that the hell is all here on earth, and we experience it while we're here. And then it's no different. It's just a shift of consciousness. So what we're experiencing here is hell, we would experience there as hell.
Right. And I think it's very important that we tell those who are listening that our philosophy, our theology, and our belief system is that on the other side, there is only heaven.
Yes.
And that everyone inherits eternal life. Everyone has unity with God. And that the hell that we've been taught about simply doesn't exist as a place.
Yeah.
It exists as a place in our conscious life here in the physical form. But God did not create a hell, didn't have the capacity to create a hell, and certainly doesn't have the capacity to send any of his children there after this life.
God is love.
God is love.
Unconditional, personified. And we put ourselves in hell. And then by the same token, after death, I believe we do have to review our life, and that would be hellish. And regardless of what good we've done, we would still see the negative that we've done. And I've read of some near-death experiences where the people would review their life and they would feel so terrible, which is what I think happens. And then they would think of the good they've done and see the good they've done, because those on the inner help us to see whatever it is we need to see for our own soul's growth. We're not judged by others after we die. We're judged by ourselves. But we're undergirded, we're helped by those on the inner to see the goodness, to see what we've done that's helped others, and how others have helped us, and how all of life is a tapestry that's intermingled. And we see how every thought we think, every word we utter has some ramification with others. And so we can put ourselves in hell as we create this tapestry of life, or we can put ourselves in heaven by doing our very best and knowing that we're doing our best.
Mm-hmm. We live in our minds and not in the world.
Right.
We know that.
Yes. Well, it's a wonderful thing to know that we can look to God for heaven, for a heavenly existence every moment that we live. And it doesn't take kneeling, it doesn't take any special ritual. It's just going to God within, go within to God, look within.
The only need that we have is to change our way of thinking, and God makes no requirements of us except that we align ourselves with His divine presence. And so we've enjoyed sharing these concepts of heaven and hell with you, and we'd like to leave you with the idea that heaven and hell are not places, but they are places that you can choose to be at any point in time, and we hope you choose heaven. And Reverend Iris Freelander and I thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time.
From the Spirit with glorious light, confident living cleanses my soul, giving the Spirit